Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team. My hope is to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. With behavior, schools are often waiting for the referral to tell us that a student is having issues. But this is too late. Using a behavior screening process allows you to address student needs before they end up in the front office. So today we are diving into this topic, and joining us for this discussion are a few of our Branching Minds team. I'm actually going to hand it over to Ashley to start our introductions and lead us through some questions. And I'm going to be talking to one of our learning science team members sort of about the background so you can get a little bit more insight about moving from the referral model to the behavior screening model.
My name is Ashley Pennell. I'm a senior customer success manager here at Branching Minds, which means I support our school districts in adopting our platform and developing their MTSS practice. I have my colleague Rachel Butler here. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Rachel Butler. I'm the Learning Science Content Manager at Branching Minds, and I'm happy to be here today.
We have Christina Solinger here. I'll have her introduce herself.
My name is Christina Solinger. I'm on our professional development team here at Branching Minds, but prior to working for Branching Minds, I was a school counselor, an elementary school counselor in St. Paul Public Schools. I have my master's in counseling. Prior to going back to school for my master's, I worked for, I was the coordinator for an AmeriCorps program that worked specifically with providing resources to school districts around early warning system indicators. So I'm excited here today to share a little bit about my experience as a school counselor.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to hand it over to Rachel to talk to us about this process of moving from referrals to universal screening.
So let's go ahead and jump into our first section. We're going to define referral-based screening to start. What do we mean by that, and why do we caution against using this as the sole method for behavior screening and tiering? So a referral-based approach means that a student is identified as needing support only after a teacher or a staff member sees a concerning behavior and refers them for support. Referral-based identification does have an important role. It's really valuable for immediate needs and for escalating severe or crisis level behaviors that might require immediate attention. We're not saying to stop referring students completely. However, when it is used as the sole system for tiering students, we run into some limitations. First, it's reactive and inconsistent. Identification is often late, and it only is occurring after a problem has become more severe. Second, it has a limited scope. It's primarily capturing externalizing visible behaviors, might be something like disruption or aggression, but it's often going to miss students with high internalizing needs like anxiety or depression. Our students who are kind of quietly struggling often are not getting referred because it's not as much of a visible problem, and that's something that referral screening can miss. And then also there's a risk of bias. Reliance on teacher observation alone can introduce biases. It can lead to inequitable identification, where some student groups might be over-identified and others might be missed completely. And then also this approach results in a data insufficiency. You get limited data points, and that makes it really challenging to plan comprehensive evidence-based supports. So it's important to have also a clear definition of behavioral risk screening, what that means, what the research shows about it. And you'll also note that we included the word universal here, which is important because that is indicating that we want to use these screening tools for all of our students. Similar to how we use data from academic screening tools, the data from universal behavior screening tools can also be used within a tiered system of support to inform teacher-delivered low-intensity supports. It's important data to collect to understand what is going on at the tier 1 level and to inform things that could be done or maybe improved upon to better support students in the classroom. It's also done to help us identify and detect students for whom the tier 1 efforts may be insufficient, and then to connect those students with evidence-based tier 2 and tier 3 strategies, practices, and programs. It's also helpful to understand what behavior screening is not. So behavioral risk screening tools are not designed to diagnose mental health conditions. They do not replace comprehensive evaluations. In a minute, I'm going to talk about an example of a screening tool, and you'll see that it is very brief. It's definitely not a comprehensive evaluation. They should not be used to label or pathologize students. And then finally, they're not going to capture the full picture of student support needs. It's really just a quick indicator that a student may need additional support. A good way to think about it is in terms of the medical field when you have something like a blood pressure test. A blood pressure test is a screening tool that can identify that somebody might have an underlying condition, but it doesn't tell you what that condition could be. It's just kind of one data point that is signaling we need to dive a little bit deeper to figure that out. And it can give some good baseline information about who might be needing further support.
So I am curious, why does universal screening work?
Well, first of all, it provides early identification. When we are proactively screening all students, we find those who are at risk before their small struggles could escalate into bigger problems. Second, it ensures objective identification. The shift to universal behavior screening moves us away from relying on subjective teacher observation alone. The screening tools provide a standardized rubric for assessment, which can give us a much clearer look at student needs. Third, the data predicts outcomes. Evidence shows a clear link between behavior screening results and future success, both behavior and academic. And finally, the results lead to data-driven interventions. It helps to pinpoint the right tier 2 and tier 3 supports, but it also allows us to take a look at tier 1 classroom and school-wide practices and see if there's any room for improvement there. So this slide is just giving a quick summary, kind of letting us see the two approaches side by side. You have the referral-only system and the universal screening system. On the referral-based side, we see a system that is primarily reactive. It's waiting for a behavior to become severe enough to warrant a referral, which can often lead to late identification and missed opportunities for early support. It is also inherently inconsistent and prone to bias. But then on the universal screening side, this system is much more proactive. It's checking every student to find those at risk before challenges escalate, ensuring early identification. It uses objective, standardized measures, which provide a much more equitable, comprehensive picture of risk. And importantly, it does include the internalizing behaviors that are often missed by referrals alone. So ultimately, universal screening is a preventative, data-driven system that guides effective tiered interventions.
Rachel, what should educators do if they're thinking about making the shift to universal behavior screening? How do they even choose the right tool?
We want to make sure we select a tool that fits your district's needs, capacity, and demographics. That's really important for successful implementation. There are 4 kind of non-negotiable traits for an effective universal screening tool. Number 1, it should be brief and simple. Teachers should be able to easily administer the tool and interpret its data. Number 2, it needs to be unbiased. The tool should be unbiased in its content and the resulting data across diverse student populations. Number 3, it should be valid and reliable. The data should be predictive of future outcomes. And number 4, does the data accurately identify students who are in need of additional support? So the specific tool that I'm going to talk a little bit about today is the Student Risk Screening Scale Internalizing and Externalizing. It's also known as the SSRS-IE. So the SSRS-IE is a 12-question universal screening tool. It has been shown in a lot of research studies to predict things like office disciplinary referrals, suspensions, as well as academic outcomes and performance for students. This is a universal screener, and it is completed by classroom teachers. It can be used across all grade levels from preschool to grade 12, and it measures two areas of behavioral concern: internalizing and externalizing. There are two versions of the SSRS-IE. One is for elementary and one is for middle and high school. And it also includes those two subscales, the externalizing behaviors and the internalizing behaviors. So teachers would just essentially go through their roster of students in their classroom, and they would rate each student on a frequency scale for how often the student displays each of these behaviors. So depending on how the scores add up, students would be identified as being low risk, moderate risk, or high risk for externalizing, as well as for internalizing.
Can you give us a little insight into what this kind of data tells us?
So at Branching Minds, we are very fortunate that we have a lot of data from schools across the country that use the SSRS-IE. So we wanted to take a look at that and try to understand how students are doing and how we can see some of these behaviors in schools and across grade levels. So this data comes from 9 school districts across 6 states, and they range in size from some very small school districts to some larger, more moderately sized districts. Most of the districts represented are rural and suburban school districts, and approximately half of them administered the SSRS-IE K through 12, and the others administered it in elementary schools only. And we also looked at students' NWEA MAP reading universal screening that was done around the same time as the SSRS-IE. And the demographic makeup of the sample based on students' race and ethnicity, and it was equally split between female and male students in our sample. Across both internalizing and externalizing domains, around 80% of students are in that low risk group. And that is consistent with other research that has been done on the SSRS-IE. There's going to be some variation, right? I mean, some districts are different, but typically you would see around 80% of your students in that low risk group. We also can see that if you're looking at the internalizing side, there are a few more students in the high risk group compared to the externalizing. But when we look at the moderate risk, there are a few more students in the moderate externalizing group compared to internalizing, but overall, both are pretty consistent. So next we break the data down by grade level. So we took those categories across internalizing and externalizing and broke it down here by grade level. And what we see is that in the internalizing domain, the moderate and high risk groups, they get a little bit bigger around 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and then it kind of evens back out a bit. And for externalizing, the increase happens a little bit later, around 7th grade, and then it kind of evens back out again after that. So that's a look at the behavioral risk data. And then next, I think I'm going to hand it back to Ashley. She's going to talk a little bit more about the relationship between behavioral supports and academic outcomes. So Ashley.
Thank you, Rachel. So this is one of my favorite things to share, those key research insights derived from linking academic data, specifically in this example, NWEA MAP growth reading scores with behavioral health data from the SSRS-IE screener. So what we can see is that there is this very clear and often overlooked correlation between the two. So showing a significant overlap between students identified as at-risk behaviorally and those struggling academically. Looking at these measures together is really important because it reveals that a student's challenges rarely exist in isolation. And sometimes I see my districts, when they start to look at this data, this is one of the points that will help them encourage others in their school district to work towards adopting universal screening in behavior. In addition to that work that they're probably already doing on the academic side, when they have been doing that for quite a while. It just helps us identify that urgent need for a fully integrated MTSS system where the academic side and the social, emotional, and behavioral health systems are working together to provide coordinated and effective intervention. So we can come to the conclusions when we look at this information that the students with behavioral challenges also have academic challenges. Sometimes when we have fragmented systems, meaning we have one really solid system for screening, looking at academics, but we don't have that same opportunity on the SEL or behavioral side, we have missed opportunities for supports. So by working together and making sure we have universal screening practices in place across academic domains and social, emotional, and behavioral health domains, we can make sure that we have a more holistic and equitable support system for our students.
Ashley, I would love for you and Christina to share a little bit about what using this kind of screening means for teams. What questions does it bring up? What kind of conversations are they having about this?
We were just talking that a kiddo with academic support should likely have a behavior support as well. We talk about that a lot with Branching Minds specifically, because also something to consider is, should you be doing those two things at the same time? Should you be doing an academic intervention and a SEL behavior intervention at the same time? Or could one of those be impacting the other? So how do you use the lever? Which is the first lever that you pull, right? Do you focus on the behavior that you're targeting, or do you focus on the academics? And so much of that comes down to the problem-solving culture and strategies that your building has. I think a lot of the time we're trying to do so many things in different spaces, right? You have your behavior interventionist doing an intervention, then you have your classroom teacher doing an intervention. That same student is probably doing some resource hunting and spends a lot of the time with an assistant principal during the day. So how do you take all of these different things that are servicing up and really focus them specifically into what is the best entry point for this student? What is it? It's working smarter, not harder.
Not harder.
It's good, because normally I goof that up and I accidentally say work harder, not smarter. And then people look at me like, I don't know what's happening.
That's not right. We're going to have to give you a screener. So Christina, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit with us about what you are typically hearing from districts who are wanting to make that shift. What's driving them to make the shift from reactive referrals to proactive data-based screening?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that one of the things that's really driving that change is staff capacity. You have staff who are saying this isn't sustainable. There aren't enough people who are specialized in this kind of training for behavior work or mental health support to meet the needs of all of those students that are being referred. I also think a huge focus that I'm very passionate about is the focus on equity. Like Rachel was saying too, that referral model has a lot of human component to it. Yep. It's relying on the lens with which our staff are coming into the building that day, the lens that they're viewing their students, the lens that they're viewing their own skill set as an educator. It's really relying so much on that human emotional element. And sometimes our students are receiving kind of the brunt of that, and students are being referred that perhaps don't need support, or they're being referred for the wrong thing because the naked eye isn't able to really understand what is the skill need here? What is the internalizing behavior, right? Those referrals come to us and it just says, student is throwing chairs against the wall, student is ripping paper off of the hall, in the hallway. That's not giving us a lot to go off of. That's really just observational data. So being able to that focus on one, we don't have time to use this referral model, which means it's not working. Just like academics, you can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem, right? It's the exact same model in the behavior world as we're realizing This referral model is pretty antiquated. It's not equitable, and it's not actually leading to student outcomes. It feels really good in the moment, right? Because it feels really good to be able to like raise your white flag and say, hey, I need help. And we don't want educators to stop doing that. However, we need to support that and scaffold that with a more comprehensive screening tool to make sure that we're equitably meeting the needs of students in all classrooms, not just those ones that have those teachers that are really waving their hands saying they need help.
And I think too, a screener can also help validate some of the things that teachers are bringing to the table, right?
Absolutely.
It can bring light to that, but it can take it deeper in the way that now we can identify topics of need, and we can really plan for support in a more effective way. So just again, thinking about that intentionality that we have when we're trying to support students, I think that that's a big part of moving to universal screening as well. Now we think about change, right? Change is always hard. So when we are asking districts, or when districts are having conversations with their staff about kind of moving away from this referral model into a universal screening model, how have you seen them kind of manage staff reactions, or have you had to coach through any of that?
I think also reflecting on my own career, I probably didn't manage that change management approach as well as I would have liked. I think a lot of the people on this call really deeply believe in the need for this screening model because we know what we would do with it. And I think that as a practitioner, I have missed that follow through with trying to make change in my staff. So I think staff here, we're moving away from a referral model and we're moving to a screener model. And they hear, very justifiably so, we're no longer going to listen to you when you need help. And I think it's so important to really acknowledge that and make sure that your staff, who are the ones especially that are there in these classrooms day in and day out, experiencing these behaviors, validating that, justifying that, and then saying, here's the outcome that we are hoping to have once we adopt this screener. This is an idea of the small groups that we'll be able to create. This is the idea of, this is the data-driven decision-making process that the core team is going to go through with that data. We're also always telling educators, well, you have to do another screener, you have to do another assessment, but we often aren't explaining what we're going to do with that data. So if we're going to ask teachers to take a risk on something like moving to a screener model, we need to show them what we're planning to do with that data and how we're still going to support them on the day-to-day level, and also acknowledging it's not a this for that. We're not saying we're no longer going to take any referrals because we're taking on this screener model. Like you were saying earlier, Ashley, like how powerful to get a behavior referral from a teacher and then say, hey, let's compare what you're seeing with the screener results so we can really work faster to pinpoint the skill that we need to address for that student.
I think what just sparked for me as you were talking, Christina, was around this terminology that people often hear, which is if we screen, we have to intervene. Mm-hmm. So how do you talk to us a little bit about that and sort of like your experience and your thoughts around that statement?
I think that's very valid. I think that is another reality that we face in the space of mental health and behavioral health. If we have data on a student that is saying something scary and we don't intervene, are we going to be held accountable for that? That is a very valid concern. I do think that it's not really reliant on the current best practice screeners that are on the market that we have with Branching Minds and that a lot of districts are adopting. They're not suicide risk screeners. Mm-hmm. Right? They are mental health behavioral screening tools. So I think that being able to really educate people on the tools, I think that was a consultant that was asking that, like pull up the screener and give those questions to that district and say, what could we do? What tools do we currently have to be able to address the responses we get from these questions? And then again, making sure that you have that output plan. So if I'm collecting all that data, do I have the capacity to do those small groups? Guess what? You're going to have more capacity to do small groups because you're going to have better data. It's going to group your students naturally. You're going to spend a lot less time trying to hunt down specific skills or specific needs, because you're able to pull up those results and group those students very quickly. So you're going to be able to respond to the screeners in a much more efficient and effective way than perhaps some of the people that have used some of those older tools, or that believe in that genuine fear about what that data is going to tell us. Are we responsible for that data? I think just trust the tools, learn about the tools, do research on the tools, and then bring those questions to the people that have those questions. Share the screener tools with families. That's another thing that comes up a lot when we're talking about making this change. There's a lot of fear in different cultures and different family backgrounds around the use of a screening tool. Very, very valid. So how are we educating families and students on, again, what is the screener asking and what are we going to use it for? It's different than academic screeners where you wouldn't, I can't imagine sitting down with every family member and saying, these are all of the questions that I'm going to give your student on your fall assessment window, right? Like I wouldn't be able to understand half of them. I have a counseling background. I'm not like a math person. But these are questions that families can relate to. They can look at them and say, hey, I want to know the answer to that question too. So exposure, exposure, exposure.
Thanks for sharing that point about families and making sure that they're, aware of kind of like what are the questions we're asking. I think that lends itself into a question around training. So when you think about getting our teachers prepared and in our students, in some instances, some of our screening tools or survey tools that exist out there are student facing. What recommendations do you have around sort of that training component?
Yeah, I always recommend you begin with a training for your staff. I would say step one is, hey, this is the new tool. Like we've been talking about, here are the outcomes. Here's the timeline of what's going to happen. Let that sit for a little bit. Let that simmer, get some of the feedback, and then later come back and say at another staff meeting, now's when we're going to do the training on how you're actually going to be completing this assessment. The tools in Branching Minds often include dual training. We include training specific to practice. So not including the Branching Minds platform, what are the best practices that I need to know as an evaluator for this assessment? And that's for our teacher-facing assessment. So one thing that we should also be mentioning is we have a couple different screeners that we offer with Branching Minds. We have the DESA, which is strengths-based. It helps identify what SEL skills to focus on. The CIRSE, the one that Rachel was talking about, SSRS-IE. That's why we moved it to the CIRSE. Rolls off the tongue a little bit better. That is the one that's better at identifying those internalizing problems. So again, instead of just focusing on those really big problems that we're seeing that are really loud in our face, how are we focusing on those internalizing behaviors that are less visible to us at the naked eye? And then the SECA is a student-facing tool that we have. So the SECA is one that you're actually giving to students. So when it comes to training, we offer different training based off of which assessment and which tool and what your goals are. All of them include some kind of evaluator training.
Let's shift a little bit to how do you determine which teacher will complete the screener? Because they're seeing multiple students throughout the day. So you have experience with that, Christina, that you can share?
Yeah. What we recommend at Branching Minds and what we've seen that works successful is you're going to want to identify the educator that is going to be with that student for multiple assessment periods. So oftentimes what we recommend is that advisory period. It seems to work really well. It feels manageable based off of what we've seen. And again, there are some rules around, like with the DESA, I know it's you want to wait a certain number of weeks before the start of the year. You're going to wait about 2 weeks to take that assessment on behalf of your students. You're not going to want to take that assessment too close to winter break. All of these things are included in our trainings. They're those like, oh, duh, that makes perfect sense. But it's hard to think about all of those things ahead of time. At the end of the day, what's most important is that it's consistent across multiple windows and that it's a space that that student is comfortable in. If a student is comfortable, the teacher is going to observe different behaviors. Also really important for those student-facing assessments like the SECA, creating that environment like an advisory period is really natural. Students feel more calm there. It feels less assessment-y. It feels a little bit more relaxed and calm. So again, just being intentional about when and who is delivering that is important.
I think we could talk all day about this topic, but I do want to let everyone know about some of the resources that we have available. We have a great screening guide that you can download and use with your teams as you're trying to decide, is this the right move for us to make? So we have a universal and social emotional and behavioral screening guide. And then we have an evidence summary, why universal behavior screening matters. So use these tools in your conversations with your administration if you're trying to encourage a change in your district. And there is plenty more available on, again, our website. And you do not need to be a Branching Minds partner to access all of our amazing guides, all of our past webinars, and all of our blog posts that kind of talk about all things MTSS, but certainly we have plenty there around this behavioral topic.
Wow. Thank you all so much for being here today and for sharing your insight. I cannot wait to share more of the resources in our show notes and to continue to having this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all that you do. We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.